Smart24, driving business.
A very good evening to you tuned in to Smart24 TV. This is Business Today and I'm Rona Nahabwe with Winnie Wiinza Nakauch the sign language interpretation. Before we kick it off, let's look at our top stories.
In business today, Uganda Manufacturers Association demands for tax cuts amid its post-pandemic recovery as Siatini cautions government over exemptions. CFA, capital markets call for private sector investment to support domestic revenue mobilization. UDB and UDC efforts are awaited. And URA demands for trade registration among farmers within 150 million threshold amid its dissent over looming tax obligation.
You're welcome once again to Business Today. I'm Rona Nahabwe. Now let's kick it off with tax amendment bills. The Parliamentary Committee has disregarded with the proposed amendments brought on by Uganda Manufacturers Association in regards to the tax amendment bills 2023. According to the legislators, Uganda Manufacturers Association has not presented other avenues through which the country can collect revenue, but instead presented excuses for not paying tax.
If Parliament approves a slew of tax reform measures contained in 6 recently introduced bills, Ugandans should prepare for increased tax burdens and severe penalties for violations beginning July 1st. Among the bills that were presented were the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2023, Excise Duty Amendment 2023, Value Added Tax Amendment 2023, among others. The Uganda Manufacturers Association has requested that the Finance Committee lower some taxes, including the Excise Duty Amendment Bill, which they propose to be reduced to 6% on the ground that majority of manufacturers have yet to fully recover from the effects of COVID-19 and the Russian-Ukraine war.
Mr. Chairman, our proposal in this regard is that the excise duty rate be lowered to 6%, or Uganda shillings 100 per litre, whichever is higher. And the justification for this, Chair, is that whereas it is noble to support localization of input sourcing, Mr. Chairman, we would want to see that this is gradual, otherwise it can result into distortions of the market. We are already grappling with issues to do with localization of industrial sugar sourcing.
The committee, on the other hand, has disagreed with the association, especially on the excuse of COVID-19, because according to them, some businesses made tremendous profits. The legislators insist that UMA has not presented alternative avenues through which government can collect taxes to sustain the economy.
VAT. How does COVID stop you from remitting your taxes? VAT is not you. Actually, most companies say we are taxpayers. They are not taxpayers. They are tax collectors. You collect money from me to remit to government. You stay with the money. for that long. So, and say COVID. Where does COVID come in there? So I don't think the COVID excuse across the board on every tax really holds water.
What new taxes should we introduce that will help create jobs? So that you don't only concentrate here, what new taxes can you introduce on certain imports that is available that will support the manufacturers to expand production and then create jobs? Look at the tax arrangement in Tanzania, look at Kenya, and give us serious proposals. And we'll give you the necessary support, including giving you the necessary tax exemption that other foreigners come here. The smaller Ugandan informal domestic manufacturers, the household manufacturers, we expect you to dig in. But you are not bringing that proposal to us.
The committee also met members of SIATINI in regards to the tax bills, and they cautioned government to review the tax exemptions. According to SIATINI, Uganda Revenue Authority would be collecting over 30 trillion shillings in revenue, but tax waivers are limiting it.
Concerned with that harmful tax expenditures, we know that there are some that are really are going into helping the citizenry, as well as the most vulnerable in society. But our effort has been and still is on the harmful tax expenditures, and where we note that government is losing over 20 trillion, like in a year, yet we believe some of this money could be channeled to finance the budget.
If we get the money that is let out of the bag through tax reliefs and tax expenditure, that target would go beyond 30 million, which would 30 trillion Uganda shillings, which would help to increase our domestic revenue and improve our tax to GDP ratio. But the continued loss of revenue through tax expenditure makes it hard for us to improve our tax to GDP ratio.
The Finance Committee continues to consult various stakeholders in relation to the tax bills before they are put back in Parliament for reconsideration on July 1st. Smart24 TV, Business Today.
Let's now look at alternative investment strategies. With traditional investments becoming increasingly volatile, many governments are turning into non-traditional approaches to limit domestic borrowing and reduce the public debt burden. Stakeholders, in partnership with other development partners, have cited a wide range of alternative investment options, inclusive of potential risks and rewards of these strategies.
Uganda's debt is continuously rising despite a number of government initiatives and donor interventions, and the country's private market environment is still confined by a small number of SME firms. Widening the tax base as a route to alternative financing, as well as involving many stakeholders from the formal and informal sectors in discussions on several alternative domestic borrowing, have been shown to be excellent for private sector-led growth models that aim to accelerate economic growth. These have emphasized that greater attention needs to be placed on encouraging local investments, since this will help URA increase tax revenue and broaden the tax base.
It should be easier to access, domestic capital. The question for us is that, is it? And internally we ask ourselves those questions. When somebody comes to us to say they want to launch a fund or they want to register a fund, how easy and swift is it? So we're going on with internal reforms to make it as swift as possible to register fund managers, private equity funds. We realized that we never had the ability to register a fund. So as the reform, let's talk about the law changes, that's really going to help for registration of funds, the actual funds, especially if they're going to be raising capital domestically.
Alternative investments actually related in helping us expand the tax base by helping businesses thrive, but also making businesses survive by their third year, because that is a big problem that we're having in Uganda today.
The Ministry of Finance has identified several key investment priorities, including private investments in the manufacturing and export sectors over a 5-year period to be taken into consideration. Climate financing, taking into consideration an agricultural credit facility through Commercial Bank, an export credit facility scheme for structured trade, and integrated East African community payment system with more than 40 currencies on the continent.
To support this trend, we are looking at an export credit guarantee scheme. We, through the Uganda's Bankers Association, are interacting with them on a regional export facility. We hope that the public and private sector can be able to forge a cooperation to lower the risks associated with export trade. The other avenue is really upping structured trade. If we are to deliver commodities, especially in the commodity space, as I noted that commodities are among the alternative investments we are talking about, we think that the work going on in terms of reviving the Uganda Commodities Exchange will be very critical.
Can we begin to think about preserving these funds and get pension payments? It's a very delicate matter, which many of you don't want to listen to. That one can be testified from the midterm access pressure, but the issue is what is going to give you that certainty of cash flow is the pension arrangement. But from the discussion we're having today, to have that long-term liquidity and investment vehicles that we are trying to talk about, we cannot ignore that drop that can distort the financials in this market.
The way forward to the above alternative investments is through government projects like UDB and UDC, where they need to accelerate their equity funds, especially focusing on the parish development model that is expected to reach 4 trillion by the end of the National Development Plan 3, actualize farming as a business and improve corporate governance.
UDB and UDC need to accelerate the setup of their equity funds, which are provided within their legal framework. That way, the capitalization that goes into these investment arms of government should be able to leverage more of the resources that are in the hands of private players.
Government funds of that nature can co-invest with other private capital providers and agree to take maybe first loss on certain strategic investments that are going to really boost employment and have other bigger economic impacts. So those are the other forms of guarantees or instruments that can give private capital comfort and encourage them to invest in an economy.
In November last year, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Uganda, Mike Ating-Ego, told Parliament's Finance Committee that the country's public debt had hit 80 trillion shillings as at the end of September 2022, which was then approximately 50% of the GDP. He further revealed, as Uganda's debt servicing in the current financial year 2021-2022 is at a rate of tax revenue estimated at 30%, and this suggests that any further borrowing with associated servicing in the short to medium term would constrain government development efforts. It is through the alternative investments that the country will be able to consider domestic borrowing rather than external borrowing. Naomi Mtumba, Smart24 TV, Business Today.
Now, looking at expanding the tax toll, Uganda Revenue Authority announced that all farmers earning 150 million shillings annually must register for TIN numbers for their businesses. The requirement aims to enhance the tax system efficiency and also increase revenue collection. But some farmers have expressed concerns about its impact on their businesses. Let's have a look.
According to the URA annual statistics book, the agriculture sector had a GDP share of 23.70% for financial year 2020-2021 and 24.07% for financial year 2022, which represents a considerable opportunity to increase government revenue. The Uganda Revenue Authority will now require all agricultural farms generating more than 150 million shillings per year establish a TIN, record transactions and preserve records for at least 5 years. However, some farmers perceive this as a burden because of current taxes and fees, and the registration process may be confusing and time-consuming.
But I also equally think it has not come at the right time. I think as farmers, there's still a lot that we need to be guided on. I must say that a very good percentage of Ugandan farmers are not really literate. Most of our farmers are, people who have not been to school. So when you speak about things like TIN numbers and taxing them, it is best that you probably first speak to them, do an extensive, training and information sharing on how they will also be able to benefit.
Its intent is to raise taxes, and most farmers, since they produce hand to mouth, that is under subsistence docket, there is no way farmers that are doing a lot of subsistence would embrace having tin numbers, because there is no rocket science about tin numbers. It is its intent is for you to be able to raise a small fund or small cost or a small amount of money in terms of tax to the government. But now it is a bigger negative area, it has a bigger negative impact to subsistence farmers. And on the other hand, for small docket of farmers that are doing commercial farming,
Suleiman Cheyune presents a legitimate point, namely that URA should carefully evaluate the operational costs faced by farmers prior to imposing any additional taxes on them. URA must have a comprehensive strategy that takes into account how taxes affect the entire industry. It can then make sure that its tax laws favor organic farming methods and foster economic development.
There's loads of inputs that cost money to the farmer. Seedlings, fertilizers, for some they've had to invest a lot of money in irrigation because of our uncertain weather conditions. So there's quite a lot of costs that must also be put in consideration before URA can think of taxing farmers.
Acquiring tin numbers will enable farmers to access government services and benefits like credit facilities and subsidies, improving their operations, productivity and profitability. Formalizing the sector will also ease doing business and attract more investment. Farmers would gain in a variety of ways, according to the tax expert Nahumza Derek of URA, because it will be simpler for them to access government services and facilities including loans, grants and licenses.
The first benefit that the farmers will get is that whenever they purchase any item that they use in their businesses, in their farming business, and once these purchases are made from people with tax identification numbers, for example, you buy from fellow taxpayers, from fellow farmers that have tax identification numbers, they will be allowed deductions. The current status of the law is that where you purchase items of more than 5 million from a person without a tax identification number, that deduction will not be allowed. But where you purchase from a person that has a tax identification number for things that are more than 5 million, the deduction will be allowed by URA.
We can enhance the sector's productivity and boost output with the correct investments and policies, which would not only help farmers and rural communities, but also raise income collection. Therefore, farmers are urged to abide by this criterion in order to avoid fines and ultimately gain access to government services. Bronya Katsime, Smart24 TV, Business Today.
Well, still on proposals to widen the tax base, according to the ministerial policy statement by Uganda Revenue Authority before the Parliamentary Committee on Finance, the authority expects to collect 29 trillion shillings from the domestic tax revenue in the upcoming financial year. Existing and new tax policy measures have been considered. Among other propositions for tax widening is the contentious livestock tax brought forward by Honorable Paul Amara, CSO Sarah Bilete, and the Bill of Livestock Identification, Registration and Movement. Let's have a look.
Uganda Revenue Authority, the country's aggregate tax revenue body, is expected to broaden its revenue base in order to meet the strategic development initiatives, despite often falling short on physical targets. Among the many recommendations is to tap into income that was previously untaxed. The Parliamentary Committee on Finance projects an increase from 25.5 trillion shillings to 29.3 trillion shillings, while providing propositions such as tax on livestock. A private member's bill moved by Honorable Asime Enos on livestock identification, registration and movement is yet to be unpacked in Parliament, one that is anticipated to vest the tax endeavours.
The Ministry of Finance have projected that URA must collect additional 3.8 trillion in the coming financial year from 25.5 trillion to 29.3 trillion. And the question we are asking is, if the tax base is not broadened, where do they expect Uganda Revenue Authority to collect money from? You are just setting them to fail. And yet there are many Ugandans who have business revenue, business income. One of which I've given you is on cows. They must pay taxes. The second one is on gold. Gold is now the #1 revenue earner in the country. But these people have been paying zero taxes. And I'm told they are suing the Commissioner General. They have run to court. They have not paid taxes. In the other financial year is about 350 billion shillings, which they have not paid.
The 2020 data from Ministry of Agriculture and Uganda Bureau of Statistics show that Uganda had only 14.2 million cattle, 16 million goats, 4.5 million sheep, 47.6 million poultry, and 41.1 million pigs. This perhaps was an extra motivation for Otuke Member of Parliament, Paul Omala, to as well propose a tax on animal sales, noting that Ugandans have accumulated wealth from cows, yet they do not pay taxes.
Taxes on animals, on cows, on goats, on sheep. The majority of the leaders in government, be it politicians, be it civil servants, people have ranches with thousands of cattle. They sell them, they earn so much money in what we call business income, but they are paying zero taxes on these animals. So I have told the Minister of Finance that we must introduce taxes on animals. And these would help us to cover the revenue gap which we are seeing, which has been presented to us.
In response to this development, Uganda Revenue Authority says that the suggestion is subjected to further study, and if it is passed, they will go ahead with the implementation.
We've had that proposal, it came through in the committee. Yes, it came through, but again, this will be subjected to further study. I think the spirit is that we must widen our tax base. So a lot of untaxed areas must be identified and be brought on board. And once there is agreement and there is a law in place, as tax collectors will go out and collect tax.
Speaking during an engagement about prudent debt management within East African region, experts disregard the move, calling it evidence of an unstructured agriculture sector.
They have combined trade, industry, cooperative, and they have given it 1.4 trillion. Peanuts. When we added some little money for trade and industry, it comes up to around 500 billion. Peanuts. And we expect to get out of poverty. We expect to trade. We are not trading.
As Uganda grapples with domestic revenue mobilization, several considerations involving tax deepening and widening have been unearthed. From the civil society's perspective, such as Center of Constitutional Governance, Sarah Birete believes that the tax should be imposed on farmers with more than 30 heads of cattle, since more than 68% of the population is engaged in agriculture, despite rebuke from the Agricultural Ministry. Runana Habwe, Smart24 TV, Business Today. Moving on to investment in tourism, Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, together with UNDP, GIZ, ESC Tourism, private sector, UTB and other players, has set aside a 4-day event aimed at unlocking potential of sustainable tourism development in the country and identify opportunities for growth and development.
According to data from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, the country's tourism sector has been steadily growing over the past few years. In 2020, the sector contributed 7.7% of the country's GDP, up from 7.3% in 2019. This growth can be attributed to the government's efforts to promote tourism, as well as the increased investment in the sector.
The sector of tourism has registered 19.3% arrivals in Uganda for holidays, leisure, and recreation. 40.9% for business tourism. 28.2% for visiting friends and relatives, and 11.6% for other reasons. Despite the soaring interest in visitation of Uganda post-pandemic, the country can still do more and attract more visitors.
The tourism industry has the potential to create significant wealth and contribute to the country's economic development. However, in order to fully realize this potential, it is crucial that the industry focuses on creating opportunities for itself, diversifying its offerings through innovative approaches, and investing in infrastructure development.
We must create our own wealth. Uganda must create its wealth. Africa must create its wealth. And tourism is one of those low-hanging fruits. Because if somebody comes here and spends, Mr. Herbert said, 40 days, assuming you take an average even of 10 days, they'll buy banana, they'll eat plantains, matoke, they'll go to the restaurant. You're creating revenue, you're creating wealth, you're creating opportunities. And therefore, in an era where development is being defunded, we need to create opportunities, and tourism is one of those that we need to pay attention to.
Encouraging sustainable tourism practices will help facilitate investment in tourism infrastructure and promote intra-African travel. By promoting sustainability and responsibility values, this will grow benefits for both the industry and promoting the eco-friendly tourism environment.
And this is sustainability and responsible tourism as the next emerging trend for tourism development, more specifically in Uganda. It is time to align all our interventions to this emerging trend. Honorable Minister and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's not that this is a new idea. It's not at all. It is just to draw our attention to the tourism practice and management that minimizes the negative social, economic, and environmental impacts that also generate greater economic benefits for people and the host communities. On the other hand, sustainable tourism has been defined by the UN World Tourism Organization.
Local tourism businesses must diversify their offering in order to draw in both domestic and foreign capital, as the market is constantly evolving to reflect the most recent trends. This will generate more revenue and promote tourism.
This also being international, we want to tap into the international market because most of our visitors are the local populace. So we had to use the Powati as a forum for us, for our voice to be heard out there, for people to know about our programs and what else we do. Because they knew us as the zoo then, but we are much bigger than the zoo. We are a conservation center. We keep so many animals. We do lots of other things. The center offers quite a number of other things. So we only use such forums for us to market and promote what we do. And promote Uganda as well. I mean, why not? This is our country.
The 7th Pearl of Africa Tourism Expo is one of the government's plans to boost investment in various tourism sectors, including safaris, hotel and lodging, handcrafts, and others. By maximizing the potential of sustainable tourism development, Uganda can draw more tourists, create jobs, and generate funds while conserving natural resources and supporting local communities. Martha Nimsima, Smart24 TV, Business Today.
Now that report will usher us into a short commercial break where we will return with more. Please don't go away.
Smart24, driving business.
a taste of Uganda in a new international park.
He must be rich, tall, handsome, from a respectable family. He must have a maid because at our home we do not work.
Conductor Masao.
Why?